What's up, guys? Jared here to review South Park Season 25, Episodes 4 and 5, respectively titled Back to the Cold War and Help My Teenager Hates Me. Now, before I get into it, be sure to follow me on Twitch. The link is in the description. I'm going live Saturdays, Sundays, and Tuesdays at 9 a.m. Pacific playing Elden Ring, which is oh so good. My username is CalsariCanet87, and Calsaricanet means getting drunk in your underwear with no aspirations of leaving the house, which is something very dear to me and dear to the society of my new home that is Finland. Also, on Monday the 14th at 8 a.m. Pacific, I'm going live with philosopher Diego Rosarin to talk about the new movie The Batman, so be sure to tune in. So anyway, let's get on with South Park. So I'm going to start off with a recap of Episode 4, Back to the Cold War. So Mr. Mackey responds to Russia's invasion of the Ukraine by over-preparing the school for nuclear holocaust, but it's soon revealed that his, as well as Putin's actions, are just thinly veiled nostalgia for the 80s, a time when their dicks worked better, and there was a clearer delineation between friend and enemy that enabled everyone to come together and love their country. Meanwhile, Butters is competing in a dressage contest. Dressage is basically the competitive horse galloping, just basically looking fancy for rich people. But he's competing against a student who's Russian named Solikov, and the adults of South Park are a bit too eager to frame a competition between children as a struggle between good and evil. In the end, Mackey learns that the Cold War isn't something to be nostalgic about because it was really scary and people died, and he thinks that if he can come to this realization and if he can change, then maybe Putin can similarly change. This episode essentially amounts to a biting accusation that Putin's aggression in the Ukraine is just the frustrated tantrum of an aging boomer with a bruised ego and a limp dick. But what I'm going to be focusing on for this video is how these perceived benefits of the Cold War that Mackey talks about can actually provide a very poignant warning about this frightening new global scenario. So let's dive in. First of all, the joke of Butters going up against a Russian in dressage, I think this joke works because dressage is pretty much the polar opposite of the kind of hyper-masculine competition of Ivan Drago versus Rocky Balboa in Rocky IV, which is definitely one of cinema's most iconic symbolic struggles between communist Russia and the West. But despite the clear aesthetic and situational differences in those two competitions, the South Park adults are just as enthusiastic to frame it as a struggle between democracy and communism, of freedom and authoritarianism, and ultimately as a struggle between good and evil, which is the kind of thing that we saw everywhere in Cold War era media like Red Dawn, War Games, Rocky and Bullwinkle, James Bond, Rambo, some of which adorn the walls of Mr. Mackey's old bedroom that he lived in when he was a teenager. And that scene where Mackey hacks NORAD is basically lifted from War Games. So here we see the episode reflect on how media is an essential ingredient in crafting that comforting distinction between a good guy and a bad guy. Now, South Park predicting a return to an age of media with evil Russians and good Westerners may seem like an inane thing that really only affects the plots of movies, but I think to dismiss it as trivial would be a mistake. See, this idea of the friend-enemy distinction is an incredibly powerful and an incredibly dangerous thing. In fact, it was essential to the World War II era German philosopher Carl Schmitt's concept of the political. For those of you who followed me in my previous venture and saw an episode that we did on Attack on Titan, we talked about this idea. But basically, Schmitt believed that having a clear enemy was critical to achieving a functioning unified state. To put it simply, a flourishing society has to have a sense of solidarity between its citizens, and nothing brings people together as quickly and as unconditionally as a common enemy. So whether intentional or not, media can further entrench us in this ideological war that creates a larger gulf in that friend-enemy distinction. And having South Park parents wave anti-Putin signs or yell about the future of democracy Nazi and heckle a Russian 8-year-old at a children's dressage competition is, I guess, a kind of sarcastic gesture toward media's potential return as anti-Russian propaganda. Now, this friend-enemy distinction is, as we see with Mackie, it's incredibly seductive. I mean, the USA has just been through over a decade of some incredibly ugly political polarization, and as Mackie says, the notion of a clear bad guy allowing us all to come together and love our country is incredibly appealing. But this media-fueled friend-enemy distinction is also quite dangerous. One obvious consequence that the episode points out nicely is that it risks unnecessary and counterproductive antagonisms. Mr. Mackie and the Stotches in particular are constantly accusing the Solikov family, which is the family of the Russian dressage player, they're constantly accusing them of being evil Reds. But the episode very smartly shows that there's really nothing Russian about this family. In perhaps the best scene of the episode, we hear the booming voices of the very Slavic-sounding Red Army choir over images of the Solikov family just eating hamburger helper and sitting in awkward silence at dinner. It's a juxtaposition that very cleverly points out that those who are just overzealous about identifying the enemy will project Russian qualities on what is very obviously just a regular Colorado family of rednecks. I mean, Mr. Solikov has the most vanilla job ever. He works at Ace Hardware, and yet Mr. Stotch somehow interprets that as an indication that he's a filthy communist. See, I think this is something that needs to be taken very seriously. Russians are not responsible for Putin's decisions, but since we live in a time where people are so hell-bent on appearing morally righteous to their peers that they'll race past the line of actually productive measures, and what we end up getting is absurd things happening, like what is recently happened in Bologna, where Russian children, like kids, were banned from a book fair as a form of protest against the war. Yeah, like punishing children is really going to help the situation. I mean, they're kids, for God's sakes. And this tendency to alienate innocent Russians feeds into the other, perhaps even more terrifying consequence of this alliance between media and the friend-enemy distinction. The way that it can prime the so-called enemies to desire their own friend-enemy distinction, especially in a time when media is more central to framing our worldview possibly than ever. Just think about COVID. I mean, people bicker far less about masks and vaccines than they did about a month ago. Here in Finland, everything is now opened up. There's no more mask mandates at my job, and at least here in Finland, the cases haven't even gone down. All that's happened is a more click-worthy headline that creates higher return on investment for advertisers has been discovered. I know that's really cynical, but I mean, there's an undeniable element of truth to that. This all reminds me of the criminally understudied media theorist Marshall McLuhan, who in 1966 once said that, "I don't know who discovered water, but I'm pretty sure it wasn't a fish. The fish will be the last to discover water." So what McLuhan essentially meant is that just as fish swim in their medium of water, so do we humans swim in our medium of media. But the fish doesn't know water is its medium until it changes, just like we don't know how much our actions are directed by media narratives until the narrative changes, like it recently has with COVID. We're so often oblivious, and this me too, about how media narratives inform and in some cases dictate our behavior, how we interpret what's important, how we interpret what is right, how we interpret what is true. And a lot of people have been talking about how recent events are evidence that history repeats itself, or that history rhymes, depending on who you ask. But as far as I've seen, one of the most egregious omissions in this discourse of repeating historical events is how this brutal economic and cultural punishment that Russians are currently undergoing has the potential to put them in a position that echoes the extremely isolated, alienated, and economically mutilated state that the Germans were, that all but primed them to accept a scapegoat narrative that put them in the pocket of a strong man before World War II. And with Putin waging an information war, banning media outlets, we ought to be very scared about Putin's ability to harness the West's cultural and economic antagonisms toward everything Russian and harness it to consolidate consent, power, and a narrative that resonates with its trodden upon people and gives them a clear enemy to blame for their misfortunes. Now, that's a lot more than I think the episode is saying, but this is kind of the lessons that I derive from the topics that the episode seems to be covering. So that's all I've got for episode 4. And as far as episode 5, I gotta be honest, guys, I really don't have that much to say. The episode was pretty funny. I loved the teenagers going, brah. It is crazy how Trey seemed so preoccupied with commenting on political issues in the first 4 episodes of this season, only to seemingly drop it all and make an episode that is likely informed by someone in the writer's room struggling to deal with their teenager, or maybe just Trey's own daughter coming into adolescence. I don't really know, but it seemed very much to be informed by just the struggle of dealing with teenagers these days who are on their phones in the toilet for way too long and just say bruh a lot. Don't forget to tune into my Twitch stream. I'm playing Elden Ring at 9 a.m. Pacific time, Saturdays, Sundays, and Tuesdays. Link is in the description. Come chill with me. You can ask me anything, and the game is so awesome. Don't forget to read my original South Park script. The link is also in the description. Follow me on Instagram, friend me on Facebook, whatever you guys want to do. Make sure to subscribe for more content about all the things that tickle my brain: narrative, philosophy, games, movies, TV shows that don't suck. You guys know what it is. All right, as always, thanks for watching, guys. See y'all on Twitch. Peace.